Welcome to the Guest House. I'm Sean Perel. I'm an integrative therapist, a yoga and meditation teacher, a lifelong student of the thesis of our belonging, and I'm also a parent and a fellow human being grappling with many of the same questions that you may be grappling with too. In these conversations, I'm turning to some of the folks I most admire, and together we're exploring the complexities and also the creative potential of being human in an era of radical change. Thank you so much for being with us. In contrast to the more touristy city of Reykjavik in the south, the city of Akureyri has been one of Iceland's best-kept secrets, and now, just for us, the secret is out. Akureyri was voted the #1 destination in Europe by Lonely Planet. It's located on the longest fjord in the country, and its mild climate and close proximity to the Arctic Circle make it an absolute bucket list must-see destination. I invite you to join me in Akureyri next October 4th to the 11th, 2025. During our week, we'll stay in private apartments complete with geothermal jacuzzis or at a local hotel, your choice. Classes will be held each morning in our private yoga space at the only wellness center in Akureyri, complete with sauna, jacuzzi, massage, and an exceptional view of the fjord and nearby mountains. After lunch on most days, we'll explore the island's incredible landscapes, venturing on breathtaking hikes, visiting frozen waterfalls, riding Icelandic horses, seeing the humpback whales, visiting a nearby island considered one of the power places of the north, taking in starlit soaks in the famous nature baths, and of course, when conditions are right, we'll chase the northern lights. Payment plans are available. Learn all about it and save your spot at seanperel.com/Iceland. Hope to see you there. My guest today is Hawah Kasat. Hawah is a celebrated global humanitarian. He's an author and an educator and a nonprofit leader. He's a TEDx speaker and a longtime yoga teacher. And I'll say a really good yoga teacher. It's worth the caveat. Hawah has authored 4 books and produced 4 documentary films. In the year 2000, he co-founded One Common Unity, OCU, which is an award-winning nonprofit that heals cycles of violence and trauma through social-emotional literacy, conflict transformation, mindfulness, mental health, and arts programming. And during his time as the executive director, One Common Unity touched the lives of over 40,000 youth and families in Washington, D.C. Most recently, Hawah helped launch Roots to Sky Sanctuary, which is a 125-acre regenerative farm and healing arts center in northern Appalachia, where he serves as the manager partner. He also recently launched a really good podcast called Evolutionary that focuses on rebalancing humanity and envisioning a way forward for all of us. So I'm so grateful to have you here in conversation, Hawah.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's great to see you and to be on the guest house. And I brought my tea.
Glad. So wait, I want to start with little trip down memory lane. We met when we were teaching together in the early 2000s at Flow Yoga Center in Washington, D.C. And a little shout out to Flow, which is really a studio that served as an incubator for, I think, a pretty visionary model of what a yoga studio in a community can be. I remember collaborating with you on the Global Mala project back, I don't know what year that was. And while you were building One Common Unity, I was in kind of a parallel process with another nonprofit called Anahata International. So these 2 nonprofits really born of the mindfulness community in Washington, D.C., rooted in healing trauma through embodiment and community and education. And so I remember just a sense of really admiring the traction of your work over time, and then getting to be in your field, just having fun together. And my fellow Aquarian, you have always had a very visionary humanitarian focus, but really grounded in personal inquiry and practice, and a fluency of body and communication, and also just a joyfulness and a sense of hope that is contagious. So I
Aw,
really admire you and I admire your work.
aw, thanks. You're gonna make me cry over here. Oh, it's really sweet. That's
Well,
really sweet.
I'm happy to share you with our listeners today. And
Uh,
okay, so can we start with just little Hawah? Like,
Little
where did you,
Hawah, like 3-year-old
yeah,
Hawah
like
or
where did you come
5-year-old
from? What
Hawah?
mattered to you? What influenced your values, your
Oh,
perception of the world?
that's a great question. Little Hawah was born in New Jersey, uh, and spent and did all my schooling in New Jersey through public school until I went to DC for college. Went to American University, but my life was really shaped by these travels to India when I was a kid. So found myself in Mumbai very often, like every second or third summer. I'd spend 2 or 3 months in Bombay, where I had extended family
Right.
and where I was definitely in areas that were very unlike where I was living in New Jersey.
Mm.
In a middle class home in suburban Jersey, an hour outside of New York City, an hour from Philadelphia. So I would say the little owl was shaped by these trips and travels overseas to India, which continued on through college. I mean, I've lived in India multiple times throughout my adult life, and probably would say a lot of my worldview, a lot of my values, a lot of the drive and motivation I've had in my life has been propelled by seeing and living and being with people who have not had as much opportunity, as much access to resources. And so the motivation I've had has been partly feeling responsible, being born in the US with like a great shouldering of responsibility to try to give something back. So I would say that's a little bit about my early life story.
Mm. Do you remember like coming back from those trips and the lens that you had on your life, you know, here in the States, like things that you noticed that were like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, that's a great question. I would say that probably. I mean, I feel like if we were all afforded the opportunity to get out of whatever neighborhood or town or city or country we lived in when we were children for even a little bit, that it would open our minds expansively to just how many different perspectives there are in the planet and on the world stage. For me, the trips like opened my eyes to the great privilege I have, right? And definitely made me really aware of how little can go such a long way. Like I became very hypersensitive to waste. Really, really, and even to this day, like it's hard for me to like throw any food out. You know, I still in my adult life, I'm still like I cringe when I see food being thrown in the trash. That impacted me really like deeply in my gut. You know, where when you see enough people just scraping and starving to eat food, it's hard to be in a cafeteria and see, food being thrown in the trash.
So much food waste,
So much food waste. Yeah.
in the developing world. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. So I would say that was pretty interesting. I think my life, I could have very easily dedicated my life to combating food waste,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
honestly.
It was interesting what you said about feeling a responsibility. We were traveling with my 6-year-old in northern Kenya, and we asked a friend there who's a member of the Samburu people, like, what is a 6-year-old? What kind of responsibility does a 6-year-old have in this community? And he said, well, a 6-year-old will be responsible for 100 goats, right? And my son's like jaw dropped. He was like, I am barely responsible for like brushing my own teeth. There's something to just even, glimpsing the trajectory of your life and how by the time you were in college, you had a real sense of responsibility and a kind of, I don't know if you would describe it as like like an activist heart, but some part of you that was like, I have a part to play in the change that I want to see in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say indignant.
Indignant.
angry.
Yeah.
I was really angry. Um, there's a lot of confusion, especially like when I'm like 11 years old, coming back from India after a summer and like just feeling really confused. Like culture shock would be almost diminishing what I was feeling. It was hard to find a ground because there was so much sense of injustice that I felt in my heart, and I didn't have a word for injustice.
Hmm.
There was no language to describe the feeling that something is really wrong in the world. And how can the world be this way? How is it that in one part of the world, you have so much waste and so much affluence and resources available to people, in another part of the world, people are sleeping under bridges and at train stations on hard concrete, cold concrete ground, not having even shoes on their feet. So, and there was no language. When you're that young, you don't have language for it. And so I think for me, there's a sense of confusion, of anger, and a lot of that anger kind of drove me through college. Just not sure where to place the anger. Not sure what I was even angry at, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
I was just angry.
Well, it does make sense because there's this, like, I think anger, especially developmentally, we want to have some particular thing. But when you're talking about systemic issues, it's like, what specific direction can you point to say, hey,
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And I resonate with what you're saying about finding a language. And you did. I mean, your podcast title is evolutionary, right? It seems to be a term that encapsulates a lot. I want to hear from you. I've been like just kind of thinking about that. Like, what is the difference between revolution and evolution, and how do we actually need that kind of like revolution, like a vritti, like in Sanskrit, this idea of like like turning. Like there's attraction to it. There's something that's really powerful and actionable about how we're participating or in conscious dissonance with something. And then evolution is this like longer arc of awakening. And how did these terms come together, and what does evolutionary kind of mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that you went there. I found the word taking on new meaning as the times have been shifting. I think there's an ever evolving process of change. The idea of impermanence is one that I hold dearly in my practice and my sadhana. And I think the understanding that things are constantly changing is a part of what roots me in the evolution with life. There's a lot of suffering that results from our grasping and holding on to things and trying to keep things as they were. And that desire to maintain the shape and the form of a thing and keep that thing exactly as it was 10 years ago, even like our own bodies, like think about as we age, right? Think about the silvers coming in and like, the body creaking and the body aching. There's this desire to feel like I was 25 again and be able to do like backflips like I used to. And so there's this desire to like freeze time. And that desire to kind of keep something as it was can be the source of a lot of suffering and dukkha, right? A lot of pain. And so the evolution, I think, is part of the embracing of letting go of that, but then also constantly searching for where and how do I keep adapting in the moment to tend to the circumstances that life is bringing forward. And when we look at what's happening in the world, I think there's no question that revolution and evolution are dancing together. And it's kind of like the dance of Shiva and Shakti, right? It's this dance of, I think often we kind of separate, and we've separated the science from the social movements. There's this kind of, oh, that's scientific, and this is social movements, and this is human behavior. But I think that there's this deeper dance between how we evolve as mammals, and that dance is a part of the cultural construct that creates our reality. And I think culture is contagious. And I think the revolution is a revolution of values of culture, as Dr. King would once say. It's a revolution of values which determines the trajectory that we ultimately end up moving on as a human species, right? And so currently the culture of humanity is one that does require a big upgrade, because the default culture is violence. It's fighting fire with fire. It's responding to violence with more violence. Like, this is the default culture. And I think that sort of cultural paradigm must be transcended for us to evolve into reaching our true potential, which involves cooperation and kindness.
Well, so you recently released a solo podcast episode where you were exploring the concept of binary thinking. And so much of what you're saying right now points me just towards this inquiry of, you shared this experience of having a heroic dose of psychedelic mushrooms and the feeling of like, oh, this is what awakening to not the reality of non-duality is, right? It's not something we think our way or rationalize our way to. It actually is an evolution in the sense that it is an awakening toward love. It's an awakening into unity consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we could just start with like, can you kind of walk us through the sense of like, what's the cost of binary thinking when you look around at the world today, and what's the invitation for all of us to heal?
I love that. You made me think of coevolution when you were prompting that, right? And I think we sometimes think of evolution in a vacuum, right? We think of like, you mentioned the mushrooms, and me on this podcast episode talking about this mushroom trip that I had in high school that basically up-leveled and created a full ego death in my mind. And in that, there's a relationship that was being developed with this mushroom plant, right? And that dance, it's a coevolution, right? We're co-evolving with plants. We're co-evolving with other animals around us. We're co-evolving with the rainforests and the oceans and the river systems and the waterways. Evolution isn't just what happens to humans. Evolution is what happens to humans as we are interdependent with the world around us. We're all evolving together. Humans just don't evolve in a vacuum. The squirrels are evolving with us. We're evolving with the redwood trees. It's a dance. And so I think of coevolution, and I think about how the world has been so hyper focused on competition as the primary engine of our social, political, and economic systems. And I think in my heart, there's a deep imbalance because we've overcommitted to one binary. And I see cooperation and competition as part of that same binary, right? Black and white, order and chaos, right and wrong, good and evil. These concepts are part of the duality that many of us that have studied the ancient texts and have learned about Buddhism and the middle way, we understand that the extreme positions, they hold a place within the importance of us learning and kind of sharpening off of like, what are the boundaries? But like, to live at an extreme for too long is actually going to create negative repercussions, right? We lose the moderation, we lose the ability to see perspectives that are outside of the boxes of black and white thinking. And so we lose curiosity as well. I think binary thinking breaks us into this trap of losing the ability to be critical thinkers that are asking questions. And so I've been reflecting a lot on that, because clearly around the United States of America, there's a lot of hyperpolarization. It's right and left. Again, back to the binary.
Yeah.
And when we become so extremely attached to one view or a belief system that we have, and we're not able to entertain or even listen to viewpoints that are different than our own, we create an environment for deep toxicity and a lot of vitriol, and demonization ends up happening because we're not open to or able to even accept the idea that somebody might have a perspective that's different than ours. And that's because we're so attached to our own perspective. And I think that's part of the binary trap. And that episode was me really working through that in my own mind, because I just see a lot of demonization, a lot of dehumanizing of people that I don't think is really supporting us in creating a conversation around unity and how to build unity and peace in the world.
I mean, we're really right in the midst of, not to speak in a like always or binary way, but perhaps the most visceral and vitriolic and vicious election that I've ever really seen in my lifetime. I think there is a sense of fear of like, we're just spinning away and like more and more deeply entrenched in polarization. And what comes with it oftentimes is a feeling of just overwhelm or despair, right? Like, how can you change the tide? And how can one change the tide? Where do we start? What influence do I have on an individual basis? And of course, like, we have to go back to the individual basis. We have to go back to the consciousness of each of us to contribute our little pixel of change to collective change. And I wonder how, I mean, you've spent decades working in communities really on the front lines of a lot of trauma and marginalization. And I wonder for you what personal practices or the evolution of your personal practice around anchoring into hope, into digging as deep as is necessary to keep showing up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really deep inquiry. Frankly, it's been hard.
Yeah.
It would be disingenuous if I was not to say that it's been pretty rough. I would say my own mental health and emotional health continues to be impacted by what's happening collectively. A lot of my own challenges have been feeling like I haven't been able to do enough, that I wish I could do more, and really having to accept the little that I can do, and understanding that what I can do is what I can do. That there's some things in my control and there's some things that are not. So what is in the sphere of my control? This isn't an easy lesson, especially for those of us, if you're tuning in, like if you feel a great responsibility, then that like it sounds good, but it's hard to actually like imagine that in reality when there's so much despair and we feel, or I feel a little inconsequential. And I think that impacts our mental health in significant ways. I'm noticing it in my own life, this feeling of powerlessness. And feeling powerless is a part of many people's experience. We all feel powerless in different ways. Those of us, for people that are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck, without money in a savings account, they feel powerless in different ways. For those that are running multi-million-dollar corporations, they feel powerless in their own ways. I think there's a desire for all of us to have some agency in what's happening, and then there's the reality that there are things that are out of our control. I root in personal practices that keep reminding me that I got to move every day. If I don't move every day, I don't feel well.
I'm with you.
Whether that's me going on a jog, whether that's me hitting my mat, whether that's me doing some handstands, I move every day.
I think I've recently held this inquiry of like, what is moving through as I move? It's not for the edification of my own, oh, I'm going to feel good in my body. It's about, in my individual way, helping to process of the collective through my own practices, so much of which are necessarily grounded in somatic experience, feeling. What am I willing to feel through?
Yeah, no, I love that. Being aware too that like that contagiousness that we were talking about earlier, that's a part of our contribution, right? Our disposition, our well-being is contagious. And so it may not be like as large of a splash as one might hope to make in the world, but like at least it's creating an opportunity for those around you in your immediate sphere to be inspired by what you're moving through you, right? Being open to that is really powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, I wonder, as you're speaking, like one of the things I just noticed is as you were responding and you were like, I'm going to be honest, like it's hard. I felt my heart open. I think concepts of hope have to be grounded, like on the grounds of honesty and an open heart.
Yeah.
Rather than like aspirational, like, oh yeah, we're going to cheat, because sometimes those kind of more idealistic treatments of hope, can actually feel dismissive of our real experience of being alive right now.
Absolutely. There's a need to protect ourselves, I think. And part of that protecting of ourselves is almost becoming desensitized to what's happening. I think that there's a part of me that at times is just trying to turn off the feeling, sensitive, empathetic part of my body, my brain, my heart, because the more I feel, the more I take in, and the more negativity and the more feelings of despair. So there's this like interesting dance where it's like, oh, there's a deadening that wants to happen because it's a way to prevent more dissonance and more sort of discomfort in my own life, right? And that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary to me.
It's the numbing. It's like
the anesthesia,
analgesic kind of effect that it's like, well, it's for good purpose, right? We numb where there's trauma, we numb where there's fear, that we numb where there's pain, and that serves its purpose. But then it also can keep us from feeling what we need to feel.
Yeah, and it keeps us from acting as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's actually really dangerous, because once we might even be unconsciously numbing. Like I notice when I'm sitting in meditation practice, at times I'm like, yeah, I'm really not, like I'm receiving information, but I'm also like, I just don't care anymore. Like there's a part of me that's like, like these are my blinders, and that's to protect myself. And then there's a part of me that becomes really worried, because I know that's exactly how we become deeper entrenched in these negative cycles. Like if I remain numb, then I don't act. And
right.
Do you feel numb sometimes?
I think it's something I'm really studying. I think I probably have this in common with you, where there's just like such an, my starting point was sort of empathetic overload. And so learning really, it's an energetic practice of learning how to, like, this classical mudra of like, how do I receive it? How do I feel it? And at the same time, feel into what the necessary, what the wise energetic posture towards this is. For example, I've just learned I can't read the news at night or else I'm not going to sleep. And then I'm going to wake up, grumpy towards my kids. And it's going to, like, there's all those kind of like iterations of how do we practice. I guess one word you could use is sort of self-care in the midst of it. But I think the back to the binary, like the risk is we either disassociate or we become so overwhelmed that we're not actually skillfully engaging. And I was recently talking to Casey Crown, who's a psychotherapist, and she studies this beautiful, like, her focus is on interpersonal neurobiology and the bridge between sort of Western psychology and Eastern, in particular, sort of the study of prana. And she talks about how what she sees a lot of now is like this fine line between activism and reactivism.
Mm.
Like, what is it to come from an equilibrated place? Like, what a profound radical practice it is.
Yeah.
To try to really anchor ourselves in our own, like you brought up, the middle way, right? Like on the ground of our own sort of well-being as much as possible as we engage in the world. And of course, this whole conversation is a luxury, right? Because you and I are here comfortable in our homes that are not under an imminent threat. So there is something I want to just acknowledge in saying, like, even having the choice of how do we work skillfully is a factor of not being in an inherently traumatic situation.
Well, thank you for calling that in. Thank you for calling that in. That's as real as it gets.
Yeah.
And I love that you looped it back to the binary, proactive and reactive, and kind of being so reactive that we're stuck in that spot of deep despair. The wise action, the skillful action, is being able to take in the full spectrum of what's possible and moving in a way that can see the future and create wise decisions now that will help us move into 7 generations thinking, and also not neglect or forget where we came from in the past, right? There's a need to pull in the past into the future to guide, like, oh, this is not where we want to go back to. Like, we don't want to return into some of these old patterns. And we seem to not be doing that very well. In some ways, we've made incredible progress. And in some ways, we haven't. And when I say we, I'm just referring to the human species as like an organism, right? As a life form that's inhabiting this planet, we continue to fall into the same cycles of extractive, consumptive, greed-driven behavior over the last like 500, 600 years, probably more so than before. I want to name that many indigenous groups, many indigenous people around the world lived in really beautiful relation with the cycles of nature, that there was thousands of years of civilizations that have existed in balance and beautiful harmony. I was just reading recently about the Blackfoot and these indigenous tribes that were here in Turtle Island, what's now known as the United States of America, who had no word for poverty. There's no word for poverty in the language. Wealth was defined by how much somebody gave away at the end of the season, not how much one accumulated. Wealth was defined by how much a person gave away. There were no jails, there were no prisons, and so there were no criminals. And it's just interesting because that was 500-600 years ago. It's not that long ago.
Not that long
It's
ago.
not that long,
No.
in the seismic scheme of geological time. It's not long ago, and so I do think that there's reason to have hope. It's not like we're just all wired. It's not like the human species is wired to just be this destructive cicada on the planet, that's coming out. And that's not actually the case. There's actually beautiful examples of indigenous civilizations that have been in really beautiful relationship. And so that's why I always go back to culture. I think so much of this is a learned behavior, Sean. Kind of curious to hear what you think about that as a teacher yourself. But like, I think so much of this, and this was what one common unity had done for 20 years. I mean, we're teaching peace, we're teaching the skills of nonviolent conflict resolution. We're teaching social emotional learning. Like, these are skills that we can learn and make a part of our cultural patterns and belief systems. Either that or we teach violence and we teach war.
Right. Well, to me, it comes back to what you were describing about, numbing. And in some ways, we're in this great experiment of forgetting our humanity, the humanity that would have been the defining force of, an indigenous culture, like, that wouldn't have a word for poverty and that wouldn't, and, would measure its wealth by its ability to give. And like a lot of my work as a therapist, when I really kind of blur the specifics of it and I just get into the essence, what is the essence of it? It's simply giving, it's simply holding a space and participating in an invitation for another person to allow themselves to feel. Because we are instruments, we are energetic instruments, and we know when we're in resonance with a higher vibration and when we're not. And we can only really persist in destructive behavior if we numb ourselves from the felt experience of it. I really believe that. Like, I really think that our North Star is this instrument of the body that we have to feel into harmony. And so, I mean, maybe it is a belief, but it's also, I know that you resonate with this because of, decades of practice also just reveals, it sensitizes us. It fine tunes the instrument such that we know what is right and what is good. And we just have to remember. But it's not a cognitive process.
Yeah.
It's back to, practices that help us to feel back into the ground of the intelligence of our hearts, of our consciousness, of our bodies, and of the body of this earth and the collective of our species and other species too.
I love that so much. You're threading the also way that we've hyper prioritized the mind and the intellect in how we move through the world. Like, what we value in this world is a very masculine intellect, right? And we're missing, back to the binary, we're missing, because of that hyper focus and value that we've placed on the mind, we're missing the heart-centered, intuitive way that we can also be in relationship with the world and with each other, right? And we're missing that. And I would actually say that it would be not wise to just start hyper focusing on just the heart and the intuition. What I would say is that the skillful way to move in the world would actually be to find the middle ground and to find out how to really merge and meld and melt the intuition and the heart with the mind.
Yeah.
And how do we like walk on that tightrope? I love to define enlightenment as like walking on a tightrope. That's always like how I think of enlightenment. It's you're walking on a tightrope, and if you lean a little to the left, you're going to fall off, and you lean a little to the right, you're going to fall off. And it's a delicate dance, you know. There has to be a little desire or a little bit of craving, a desire for becoming better, for evolution, right? For revolution. There has to be that desire for growth.
Yeah.
And we have to let go of that desire at some point if we want to fully like encapsulate the experience of being in that space. So it's like there's that back to that binary. There's the heart, and we've totally lost sight of that. We've forgotten, as you said. We need to remember again how to feel, how to lead, and how to be heart-centered. But let's not neglect all the beauty of the mind in that process. Let's just bring them both to the same level of value and prioritization. And this is why I'm such an advocate of like having women and non-binary identifying people in leadership positions. The masculine and the feminine are part of the binary, and and I don't know, the word we is actually not even accurate, but for whatever reason, the masculine, men-based leadership has completely overrun and overruled the planet. And we see that playing out, everywhere. It's just like men in all these positions of power. And I think it's really disassociative, and it's really damaging to our ability, because the women to me represent this incredible, powerful force of nature that we're just completely missing as a species that's embodying like living on this planet. And so we need to like uplift and rebalance, right? And that needs to be like tangibly, that needs to be how we integrate and create more pathways for women to be in all these positions that we need to get men out of. Men don't need to be in these leadership positions. We just fuck everything up. That's all men do.
Well, gladly accepted, brother. But I do think what you're pointing to, like that word integrate, is so powerful, because we've been doing things from through a certain lens, right? With the values, patriarchal values, we could say, which is a much more sort of top-down integrative process, right? And then what we're just describing in this very somatic, intuitive, felt experience is bottom-up intelligence. And so it's and you're right, they have to be, it's the yin and the yang, like they have to be in harmony with each other, and they have to be in conversation, in communion with each other. Otherwise, we're cutting ourselves off from part of our intelligence. And I mean, individually and also collectively. So which brings me to, I see you as an activist as much as a creative, a practitioner, an artist in your work. You have this long time Vipassana practice, meditation practice. What can you, in addition to other layers of practice, like engaging in the world, right? And moving your body, what to you is the value of stillness and silence? How is that meditation such an important anchor in your practice?
One of my Achilles heels is that I think I'm so curious that I want to try to do everything. And I love to play my djembe, but I'm not a djembe master. But I love to play my djembe. And I love to sit in a sound circle and just play on my drum. And I first say that because like the prompt to what you said was naming the various ways that I've been engaging in the world for a long time. I would say that there's an old proverb, an old story, because it's not that old, but there was somebody digging for water in a village in Africa, and they were digging down. They dug like 20 feet, and they're like, there's no water here. So they ran over another to another part of the area. They dug another 20 feet. They're like, there's no water here. And they went over another to another spot. They dug another 30 feet. There's no water. They're trying to find water, but they're only digging 30 feet, 20 feet in all these different areas. And then one day an elder comes in. He's like, why don't you just dig deeper into one spot? And if you just dig deeper in one spot, you'll probably hit water. And so all the villagers are like, okay, well, this elder is saying, let's dig deeper here. So they just go back to that initial spot, and they just keep digging and digging and digging until they get like 100 feet down and they find water. And I love that story because I think there's a value to stillness, because to me, stillness is digging. It's excavating. The silence is like taking a shovel to the mind and just like shoveling out all the thoughts and shoveling out all, and you're just shoveling shoveling.
It's like the double entendre of boredom, like boring and boring down.
Ooh, I love that. Yes, you're boring down in stillness and silence. And to me, I mentioned my Achilles heel. And then I would say like the piece to the Achilles heel that has been probably the most foundational part of my entire practice has been sitting in stillness and silence. And I've been making this a practice of mine since 2004, where I've been sitting long silent retreats and digging and digging and digging into one spot. And it's created stability in my life. It's created a sense of equanimity, equilibrium, balance. It's allowed me to move through probably uncountable intergenerational trauma that I've been moving through on my own. It's been my form of therapy. And I think stillness is, in my life, it's been critical in having the anchor and the root. Like I kind of see like I think if you want to go really high, you have to go really low.
Yeah.
Like I see, and I work with students a lot that just want to like be up in the clouds, and they're just so far out in the clouds, and there's no tether to the ground. And so because there's no tether, you can just become very much vulnerable to the winds of change, and the winds will just blow you in any direction, that they want to take you in. But I think actually being still and being silent is like boring a hole really deep into your mind and anchoring yourself, so that now that you're really anchored in the earth, you can actually go even higher and you can explore with stability. And then back to the binary, it's like that. It's like the pushing and the pulling. And so for me, silence and stillness is grounding, and it's allowed me to work with even like the deep work I do with plant medicine. I attribute a lot of like the beneficial work I've done with that has been rooted in like a deep meditation practice, which allows me to remain really stable while under the pressures and sort of the pressure cooker of like a 3-day ayahuasca journey, right? Like there's a stability that I can maintain while this other medicine is moving through me, which allows me to even open up more doors of perception and change. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of what came.
I mean, yeah, and it actually just brought me exactly to where I was hoping to go, which is roots to sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the name of the sanctuary that you've worked to birth in the mountains of West Virginia. And I want to hear more about it, because it seems like what you're describing in the kind of primordial soup of consciousness practice actually can emerge, can manifest in such tangible ways in the world.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you have an open invitation, you and Russell and the whole family, to come anytime you're visiting the East Coast in DC. Please let us know. We are just 3 hours from Washington, DC, 2 hours from Pittsburgh, 4 hours from Philadelphia. and we're situated right at the border of southern Maryland, southwestern Maryland, and West Virginia,
Mhm.
near a town called Thomas, West Virginia. And we started this regenerative farm and healing arts center in the year 2020. So right as COVID was upending our world, this was already kind of in motion and already happening. And the place is really important, I think, within where and how I see us coming back to the land as people. I feel there's a deep need to once again put our hands into the earth and to know what it feels like to grow our own food, to to tend to the land and the waterways. I think there's a lot of healing in nature that is self-evident. Nature in and of itself is a teacher and a container. And so Roots to Sky has become a sanctuary for groups, individuals to come on retreat, to come for practice. We've slowly been working on finding ways to bring more and more BIPOC people, brown and black people of color, out to the land and into nature. So part of our mission is to reconnect BIPOC people to nature. And that's been wonderful to see how in the past 4 years we've grown a lot through the support of volunteers and incredible partners that I work with. I'm one of the founding members, but there's a trifecta of us here holding it down at the root. So yeah, Roots to Sky Sanctuary, it's still in its nascent, kind of like we're in the emerging phase. We're just kind of like getting on the map. We're purposely not on Google Map. So like, you know, you can find our website though and learn about us and visit us at any time and see what we're doing out there. We're open to have animals. Our first crop was maple syrup. So
Yay!
we've just been listening to the land, Sean. We've been listening to the land. You know, we spent like the first 3 years, we're like, all right, so what are we going to first start planting? And let's put up some greenhouses. And then one of our local partners came out and he was like walking around. It's 125 acres. So it takes a long time to cycle through the land. And he was just looking on the hillside. He's like, you guys just have so many maple trees. He's like, you've got like 50 acres of maple trees. He's like, you don't have to plant anything. He's like, you got maple syrup right here.
I mean, talk about plant medicine, right? Like,
yeah,
there's nothing so, I remember going out and tapping maple trees for maple syrup and just being like, there's something so sublime about the sweetness of nature that it's like, it's so simple. And it's so marvelous at the same time.
It's so medicinal, right? And it's old. Maple syrup is old medicine.
Yeah.
It's a really old medicine. So we've got maple syrup now. Like we've tapped like I think 600 trees this winter, and we've had like 100 gallons that we made this winter. And next winter, like this winter coming up, we're planning on bottling and having Roots to Sky maple syrup as like our first real regenerative project. But it was kind of funny because a lot of people, as we were starting to move through the land, many of the indigenous elders that we were bringing out, they said, you know, just spend some time and listen to the land. Don't come in and just like start building. Don't start just dropping things. They're like, watch where the water flows. Notice where the water flows and just pay attention to how the water is flowing and just listen to the land. That's what all the elders were telling us. We're like, all right, we're just going to listen. And so we were silent and we just listened to the land for like 2-3 years. And then all of a sudden, poof, out of nowhere, we're just like, we have this revelation that we're sitting on, you know, 50 acres of maple trees that would take 30 years to grow otherwise. And like, all we have to do is tap them and we have maple syrup. So we didn't have to plant anything by listening to the land. Yeah.
and that all of this indigenous wisdom was just pointing to, hey, the teacher's already present here. You just have to listen, right? You just have to listen.
Back to silence and stillness, right? So, and that's why silence and stillness are such invaluable teachers, right? I think they remind us they don't even remind us, but they create the opportunity for us to listen more deeply. And when you were asking earlier about, the difficulties we have with the polarization in the United States and around the world, just there's a tendency to not listen to each other with the same compassion that perhaps could provide more understanding between different people, different nations, different communities. And I think that all could be supported by sitting in silence more and learning how to sit with silence and stillness. So in a strange, like, existential way, it's actually very connected to like our present predicament, because we're constantly being bombarded. We're constantly in this like cycle of news media, and it's just like, why do we take a moment to step back? Is it a privilege? Yeah, sure it is, but it's also an important part of us not falling into the trap of living in a world that has us constantly feeling like we need to react. It's actually very revolutionary to sit still and to turn things off, because it creates the space in our minds to think more clearly, and to be more tapped into our hearts.
Such wise counsel. Amen. Thank you, my friend. Hey, friends. Thank you so much for listening today. If you find value in these conversations, here's how you can support. Become a subscriber at seanparel.substack.com, and please rate, review, and share your favorite episode with a friend. I leave you with an original song written by Serena Joy Bixby for all of us still learning what it means to be human.
Is it love? Is it hate? Grief or heartache, or what does it mean to be human? Is it tears? Is it laughter? Is it not knowing what comes after? What does it mean to be human? Well, I'm sure I don't know. This life, where it goes, the days come, the days go, and I'm still human. Oh, one thing I know for sure is I'm looking for more. Gonna go out, learn what it means to be human. I find the joy in the mess. Oh, I'm just doing my best. being human.